Morning. I'm Lila Mowerʻs, President of Kokua Council. My colleagues Rick Tabor and Doug Matsuoka will co-host and help me moderate today's forum. You'll meet other Kokua Council directors throughout today's meeting. Kokua Council advocates, informs, and educates to improve laws, policies, and practices impacting the well-being of seniors, their families, and our community. We advocate for good government, one that's transparent and accountable, laws that are fair and enforceable, government that is shaped by checks and balances, and a government that is civil and uncorrupted. Just this morning, I read an article in which these phrases were found. A downward spiral in confidence in democracy, an ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor, the environment, climate change, a broken state, we've lost our way, the spirit of aloha is disappearing, homelessness, the crime rate has spiked. Those are just some of the concerns we, the public, have, and we look towards our leaders, those who have nominated themselves to be elected as our public servants, to address these concerns with solutions, not just rhetoric. With the goal of improving and strengthening our community, Kokua Council holds informative forums. This year, an election year with all state legislative seats open, the executive seats open, 4 Honolulu City Council seats open, as well as many on the neighbor islands, and Oahu trustee seats, Kokua Council will hold as many forums as we are capable of handling to educate the public about our candidates. However, because there's so many open seats, it's impossible for Kokua Council to hold forums for every open position, and we hope that our community understands. Please join us through our election year journey. This morning, we greet the candidates for State Senate District 11, Barbara Fukunaga and Ian Ross. Ben Sakai let us know that he will not be able to attend. Each of you will be given 3 minutes to introduce yourself, our candidates. So that candidates in the Zoom audience do not speak over each other, please wait to be recognized to speak, and when you're recognized, please unmute yourself and turn on your video. At this point, I'm going to go to speaker view. All right, so let's start with our first candidate. Carol, will you please start? You have 3 minutes.
Aloha, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Carol Fukunaga, and I'm running for the newly reapportioned Senate District 11 seat, which also includes portions of Makiki Punch Bowl, Papakolea, and Tantalus. These neighborhoods are within Council District 6, where I'm currently serving my last term. I've been asked to run for this seat by several longtime Manoa and Makiki community leaders, partly to address a number of issues that straddle city and state jurisdictions. For example, increased crime, homelessness, pedestrian safety, and those ever-present monster homes, just to name a few. At the same time, I have devoted over 30 years to serving as a state legislator, and most recently as a city council member, where I have fought for transparency, efficiency, and accountability in government, which I hope resonates with your Kokua Council members and viewers. Your families, neighbors, and communities have always been my priority focus. I agree with President Mower's earlier comments in that today's challenges are unprecedented. We're entering what we hope will be a successful post-COVID recovery. However, from Hawaii's position in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we also face supply chain shortages, disruptions to small businesses, and the departure of families who cannot afford to live in Hawaii any longer. It is time to apply what we've learned from COVID, to use our can-do spirit, and to create a brighter future. I'm very encouraged that the 2022 session of the state legislature funded Department of Hawaiian Homelands to the tune of $600 million, appropriated $50 million for affordable housing, made the earned income tax credit permanent and refundable for low-income families, funded $30 million to assist Medicare enrollees, and $75 million in school improvements for the region. This is a great start to retooling Hawaii's future. And we can do so much more if we also combine our city-state resources and work together as a team. You know, we will elect a new governor, lieutenant governor, and all the members of the state Senate and the state House in this year's elections. If there were ever a time to tackle the challenges of moving Hawaii forward, this is it. Our success will depend on plans that include meaningful community involvement and participation, to allocate our resources, and to achieve tangible, measurable results. So thank you so much for this opportunity to visit with Kokua Council, and I look forward to your questions. Aloha.
Thank you very much, Carol. All right, Ian, your introduction, please.
Thank you very much. Aloha, everyone. First off, let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to both the organizers and everyone attending. It is so nice to see so many familiar names and faces on today's Zoom. For those of you who I'm only meeting today, my name is Ian Ross, and I'm a candidate for Senate District 11. And I also want to recognize the significance of the group we're speaking with, Kokua Council, one of Hawaii's oldest advocacy groups. You are leaders in empowering seniors and their advocates and effectively supporting our community. This isn't my first time joining you. As the former public policy manager for the Alzheimer's Association, an active member of the legislature's Kupuna caucus, I've frequently made common cause with you. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I was born in the district I'm running in and was raised by a single mother on Kauai. Things were not always easy. I worked my way through both high school and college, and in fact, my first job was at a senior living facility. I'm a proud graduate of UH Manoa with a degree in economics, and today I have the honor of serving as chair of the Makiki Lower Punch Bowl Tantalus Neighborhood Board. And that brings me to why I'm running. We are in a defining moment for Hawaii. The pandemic has highlighted deficiencies and long-standing problems, and many of our elected leaders were caught off guard. Action didn't come fast enough. The elderly have been hard hit by the dangers of the disease, often profound isolation, and those on fixed income are being squeezed especially hard by inflation. As a community leader and someone who has successfully led grassroots efforts to change policy, I'm running for the state Senate to offer a fresh perspective and real solutions. My journey into kupuna issues began because both of my grandmothers had Alzheimer's disease. My family was dramatically impacted by this, but I know my story is not unique. 1 in 9 people who have Alzheimer's disease by age 65. So this is impacting many families across Hawaii. 29,000 people over 65 have Alzheimer's today, and they're cared for by 52,000 caregivers in Hawaii. At the Alzheimer's Association, I helped hundreds of affected family members, caregivers, nurses, doctors, and even those living with the disease to become advocates and make their voices heard by the legislature. If elected, I want you to know that I'll hear your voice, take your calls and meetings, and champion your causes. I am optimistic about what we'll achieve together for the people of Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Excuse me. All right, Doug, you have the first question.
Okay, hi, I'm H. Doug Matsuoka. I'm a volunteer director here at Kokua Council, where one of our main issues is aging in place. I also work full-time for Hawaii Meals on Wheels, where we deliver to a lot of seniors who are in pretty dire straits. And then on weekends, I volunteer for Food Not Bomb, which is feeding an increasingly older bunch who are living out on the streets. So right now I'm receiving Social Security and working full-time. And I want to point out that I'm a senior. I'll be 70 in a couple of weeks. We seniors are providers of social services and not all consumers of social services. But my question is, what can be done legislatively to ensure that people like me have a place to age in place when I'm no longer able to work? And that question goes to, I'm not sure who answers first.
It would go to Ian.
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a pertinent question. I know a lot of people are asking it right now. First and foremost, I would say that we must support Hawaii's working families, caring for aging family members and those aging family members by establishing a public long-term care insurance model. About a decade ago, a study was done, and was mostly through that it was feasible and would support kupuna who need assistance. And there was quite a large push for it at the time. And as many of you may know, this was the birth of our kupuna caregivers model, which provides for working families who are trying to have a job and also care for their elderly. This model was actually adopted by one state already. And a lot of people take credit saying that it started out because of the research here in Hawaii. And Washington State has the Washington Cares Fund. So 7 in 10 residents will need long-term care services. And a modest-sized program would be affordable and help our kupuna live with dignity. And so this is a little bit about what it would look like. Long-term care insurance exists. I think many of you be familiar here. For those of you who don't know, I'll give very brief background. It's a type of insurance model that people often get quite a bit later, so it ends up costing quite a bit to some degree. But it insures against needing long-term care services such as nursing at home, maybe in long-term care facilities, maybe retrofitting your home to make it safe as you age. And because of the fact that so many people need it, I think it's a really strong candidate for making a public model. It could allow for private to exist as well, but this model could be very helpful. Also, it would help many of those who do not qualify. The private insurance, unfortunately, does some things which I find to be pretty reprehensible. For example, they will exclude people who say given organs to family members, so they are no longer eligible. Or those who've gone ahead and thought it was responsible to get genetic testing to see if they're predisposed to diseases like Alzheimer's. And once you know that, you can't go for the private model. So I think it makes a lot of sense to integrate on the state level. And what we would be able to do is help many of Hawaii's caregivers with this. 1 in 5 Hawaii's adults are a caregiver right now. And it will help our seniors to have the dignity of being able to, as much as feasible, stay at home, get in-home care maybe once a week or so, to be able to make those retrofits, the homes that make it much safer. One last thought on this, that's a really important impact. When people have catastrophic declines in the ability to take care of themselves, it often falls to family members, and it doesn't fall evenly. 59% of these caregivers are women, and a large amount drive themselves into debt, out of the workforce, or use their own retirement funds. And our caregivers are the most compassionate and hardworking people in the community. So let's take some of the burden off of them and understand our societal role in honoring our kupuna. And that's why I support a public long-term care insurance model. There are some other things I'm sure I'm going to be touching on later, but with 3 minutes, that's what I'm able to share at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Carol, your response, please. Oh, you're muted. Carol, you're muted.
There we go. Okay. Thank you so much for this question. You know, I also support a public long-term care type of insurance model. However, I think one of the things that we should note is over the past 20 years, we have tried several times to implement such an insurance program. And because of the cost of a broad program that covers everyone, we have found that it was not possible to achieve such a model. So in discussions with many healthcare providers, as well as senior housing and long-term care administrators, one of the things that we have identified is the fact that in Hawaii, we actually have the closest thing to universal coverage of any state in the country. And so that's actually a plus. At the same time, we have 3 factors that help us identify those who probably will be able to manage with much less reliance on the public model than others. For example, many residents have long-term relationships with their primary care physicians. And so this is actually one of the first starting points, where a long-term relationship with your primary care physician, benefit of extended family, as well as friends and networks, really makes it possible for a lot of people to have a rich network of support in place as they age and as we look for ways to provide additional services. My approach would be to identify those who have the greatest need and who lack those kinds of networks in place, and to look to see how we can incorporate a community-based model to help address their needs. For example, I have lived in condo communities for most of my elective service. And one of the things that condo associations now have to do is, generally, in order to have an emergency plan for fires or any other kinds of emergencies, you always have to update the number of individuals and their locations within the building for those who are not able to walk without assistance. Similarly, at the neighborhood and single-family residential level, we have a vast network of neighborhood security watches. And in a number of instances, these security watches also do similar types of things to help identify those who may be within the greatest level of need and those who may need assistance from others. So if we're going to target specific programs and assistance, whether it's the community paramedic type of model, additional stipends or grants similar to what we currently have in place, I would start at that point. And so sorry, I believe my 3 minutes are up. Happy to touch on this further.
Thank you very much, Carol. All right, you're going to take the next question, Carol, and it will come from, Rick. Are you ready, Rick?
I'm ready. Okay. So kind of along the same lines. So we've got a huge issue going on right now here on the island. So 37% are actually 65 or older here on the island. In the next several years, folks that are 65 and older are going to outnumber folks that are 18 and under. And we're hitting a logjam right now with the labor force for everything. But Wahiawa Hospital's nursing home is closing in the middle of July here. There's going to be no services for them between Pearl City and Kaneohe. That's over like 3,957, I think, folks 65 and older, according to our ombudsman's figures. So it's going to have to be in home, but if they needed to go into nursing home recovery center, it doesn't exist at this point. So that's just one of the issues, along with the others that you just highlighted. What do you see as the issues for our kupuna coming forward? And as you're in office, what policies and programs do you hope to put in place? And let's just start with that. There's a huge gap. Nursing homes they're all going to fold pretty quickly here if this doesn't change. They're all struggling for staffing and whatnot. Okay, so who's starting, Lila? Is it Carol? Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Okay, let me unmute myself.
You're unmuted. You're good to go.
Okay, great. One of the things that we have found at the neighborhood level is that over time, many of the people who have been in nursing homes are actually having great difficulty, when they stay for long periods of time. So I'm actually a strong advocate for moving more people back into their homes and working with their families to provide additional services via various state and county programs. Now, in the past, most of those programs were funded at the state level, and at the city level, we provided very few social services. We do work with programs like Catholic Charities, Lanakila Multipurpose Senior Center in providing services for seniors who reside at home. And to the extent we can expand upon those types of models, that would actually be a very valuable supplement to what nursing homes and other kinds of programs offer. The thing that is most exciting with Lanakila Multipurpose Senior Center programs is that in spite of the pandemic, they have actually doubled the size of their programs by being able to reach out to growing numbers of seniors. They have worked with AARP and others to expand the numbers of interventions that they're able to provide for seniors at home. They also provide programs for classes as well as other kinds of outings that may provide a lot more in the way of services to seniors than we can typically rely upon nursing homes for. I certainly agree with you that the cost of nursing homes is pretty much far beyond the scope of what many families can provide. So the other portion of that issue is really to look for ways to help fund support for caregivers in terms of their families and providing additional stipends as well as tax breaks if they are providing care for loved ones at home. We tried to adopt legislation previously at the state level. I don't believe we have grown the program to the degree that we would like to see it, and that would certainly be one of the areas that I would focus on if reelected. Thank you.
Yeah, that's just a qualifying question. What I'm learning as we get into this is that the issue is cost is part of it, most certainly, definitely. Labor force is the huge issue. The people are not there to do the work. So how do we mitigate that? It's more kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay, I certainly can share your concern there. My mother is in a nursing home, and I agree. The COVID pandemic has really made it difficult to keep and retain nurses and CNAs. And so there's a number of programs that places like Hawaii Pacific University, Chaminade, and others are pursuing to upgrade and to increase the number of nursing as well as healthcare staff that can be certified. And I believe that we have to kind of act more quickly at the community college level so that the kinds of programs that can help increase the level of providers and assistants can be added as quickly as possible. There's some initial talk that is going on at the city level through the Workforce Development Council. And I would imagine that very, very shortly, this would be an area that both the University of Hawaii system as well as some of our other HPU and Chaminade programs will be looking to expand upon. Thank you.
All right, next is Ian.
Thank you very much. So, Rick, I take your question kindly. I think it's a really critical one. And this would have been a problem if raised 10, 20 years ago. And I think it's probably close to rightly described as nearly a crisis at this stage. With the Alzheimer's Association, as you might recall, I supported Rep. Takayama's bill to offer higher pay to educators to nurses. One of the issues that we run into is that many people who work in the nursing field can actually get pretty decent salary, even here in Hawaii. But as an educator, they get paid less. So it's hard to find highly qualified nurses who would want to go educate the next generation of nurses. And when you run all the numbers for several years, for about $2 million, you can increase pay, buy better textbooks and materials, and actually increase the number of people who offer this education. Critically, one of the things that is often found is that the demand for people interested in getting into these fields is relatively high in Hawaii. And it is the choke point for a lot of this. The bottleneck is very often the number of educators who can train them quick enough. So I think this could be a very wise use of funds. And because it's increasing salaries that already exist, it actually looks a lot more affordable than you might initially expect. But we have to work very closely with our University of Hawaii partners. There are many fields in which people take a big pay cut to become an educator. So we have to make sure we do this in an equitable way, but I'm certain there is a pathway forward on this. And I believe that Rep. Takayama is putting the lion's share of work with his current bill. And I do hope to see something along that language passing soon. Furthermore, we're talking a lot about the families taking on burdens. And I believe families are really pushed to the near the breaking point on this. If you look at just the increased healthcare costs that caregivers have by being caregivers, even for Alzheimer's disease, it's $20–30 million a year in additional healthcare costs. The stress is high, the burden is high. I was born here, and most of my born and raised here, most of my middle school, high school, and college friends have moved away. And so their parents and grandparents increasingly don't have a family network to care for them. I read recently that the majority of Native Hawaiians and also the majority of people from Hawaii with a college degree no longer live here. And so what this is increasingly putting pressure on the people who can be caregivers. And there's many caregivers who are sandwich generation, caring for both the elderly and children. And so we need to look really carefully at the systems that we put in place and not just hoping that family members can continue to pick up the slack, because I do feel our families oppressed. One final thought, I think I have 10 seconds left. With wages often being too low and costs being very high, we need to look at ways that government can reduce costs overall. And that's one reason I'm a supporter of the Aloha Homes program, which I believe I'll hopefully get a chance to go into a bit later. But it's one way we can lower the cost of housing to hopefully make the squeeze less intense on many of our working families. Mahalo.
Thank you. All right, our next question is for Ian from Greg. Greg, are you ready?
Yes. So my name is Greg Misakian. I'm from Waikiki, and I'm one of the directors with the Kokua Council. And I have concerns regarding our housing, which not only has impacted me, but I know impacts many, many residents all throughout Hawaii, specifically focused on, sorry, I start my video here, specifically focused on our condo industry and the high costs of maintenance fees and condo insurance costs in general. And one specific question has to do with the condo insurance industry right now in Hawaii. So with more industry regulation needed to mitigate the high insurance increases to condominium associations, insurance companies seem to be taking advantage of the lack of oversight by the state to address deferred maintenance in the many aging condominium structures throughout Hawaii. What are your thoughts, and what will you do to help bring the cost of insurance down for condominium associations?
Thank you very much. You know, I live in Makiki, which is a place where we do have many condos. And, you know, we had the explosion of building high rises mostly in the 70s, and we've seen a lot of decrease. And in talking with some of the people of the industry, I do hear very often that they have a really difficult time quantifying some of the costs because of the increased chances of flooding from one apartment building to another, et cetera. I think there are two really big issues related to what we're talking about from insurance. So first off, it's that many even of these luxury high-end condos that aren't even necessarily for the people of Hawaii that have been built in places like Kaka'ako are being done in a substandard way. I hear about brass pipes that instead really changed with PVC, and a lot of people aren't in these condos. So if a flooding starts in one, it can continue down pretty far and do substantial damage. And this increased potential premiums for everyone. And that's really on the end of the, goes to the construction industry, and the fact that they didn't fill in and meet the actual expectations of the building. So that's a place where we have these rules, but we don't necessarily have the inspectors in place. The other is on the affordable housing end, as you were highlighting. We're trying to get these affordable units, and we see them becoming close to uninsurable by some of the costs. So I do feel there's a real place for government in this one. And one of the areas I think we can do a lot is when we're appointing commissioners. So both Carol and I, or pardon me, Councilwoman and I, are both running for the one office in the state legislature that actually gets to have a say in a vote on many of these commissioner appointments. So when it comes to cost of living, I will be asking commissioners what their vision is, what they see as the role, and how they can be more aggressive in looking at this. I want really for us to find ways to reduce costs across the board. And when insurance fees are too high, this can have a really, it's not just for the current residents, but it has a downward pressure on ability to construct homes across the board. This kind of, I think, might give me a good place to dovetail back to the Aloha Homes idea, and where I think it gets some real advantages. We do have areas in the urban core and along the TOD zones where the state has land and can actually be a leader in constructing some of these units. A rather unfavorable study was done, and it all the same concluded that for under $400,000, we can construct thousands of more homes on these state lands, with the state working directly with some developers and bring down the cost in that way. And with the state being the primary, the landowner and not having to do all the additional purchasing, that helps the cost. But also we could use the government's almost monopolistic purchasing power to potentially negotiate lower insurance rates for these units, because we'd be able to construct so many and have this ongoing relationship where we're doing more. We see this potentially in healthcare. Of course, Medicare and Medicaid are limited in their ability to negotiate drug premiums, where they obviously shouldn't be limited on the federal level. And the point there is, as a bulk purchaser, you have a lot of influence in the capacity to drag down costs. And I do think that's another mechanism. And insofar as we find that pathway forward by putting pressure, hopefully developers of affordable housing projects in the future can follow similarly. So those are my thoughts on how Aloha Homes fits in, and also my thoughts on how the insurance industry overall is impacting the way we're looking at both these luxury and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We went over a little bit. I really don't want to cut you off.
I apologize.
I hope we can keep timing ourselves. If you see me waving my hand, it means please wrap up quickly. Okay, Carol, your answer, please.
Thank you very much. To address Greg's point regarding the insurance industry in Hawaii, I think one thing that we should be pointing out is that in recent times, the collapse of the condo property in Florida has precipitated kind of a crisis in insurance rates throughout the country. And so, say, for example, with older condominiums, you know, where we have been talking about condo fire sprinkler retrofits for older buildings that were okay at the time that they were built. But now, you know, the city wanted to have these buildings retrofit their properties to install sprinklers in the aftermath of the Marco Polo fire. The issue involving insurance is one that is actually being driven partly by a global insurance crisis that is not necessarily of our own making. So during this year's discussion on tweaks to the condo fire sprinkler retrofit law, what we actually found was that there was fairly spirited discussion between many of the condo association managers and the condo management companies, who pointed out that even though they were complying with many features of the life safety evaluation process and making fire safety upgrades, their insurance rates were still going up by 20 and 30%. So in that sense, I think state legislation is the appropriate place in which to weigh in, to tie insurance rates to the steps that we are taking locally to ensure that condos that are older, that, you know, may be pursuing specific fire safety improvements, can have the benefit of reduced insurance rates, and that we're not being affected as dramatically by some of these global conditions. I do know that the federal financing agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, have also begun moving in the direction of restricting financing for purchases of older condos, particularly when they deal with the issue of fire sprinklers and or other kinds of fire safety improvements. So that's with respect to insurance. I do think there's a lot that can be done. With respect to how and where we might be able to develop more affordable housing, my focus has really been to partner with organizations like the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, which does have a number of state properties along the transit route, where we have estimated that if the city will do its part to ensure that we upgrade our sewer and water infrastructure along the transit-oriented development routes, you know, from Kapolei all the way to Honolulu, that would help us in redeveloping the HPHA properties so that we could generate as many as 10,000 new rental units for lower income and middle income families who would be able to qualify for some assistance with housing. I'm going over too, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. The next question will be for Carol from Dale. Dale, are you available? Are you on? Dale Head, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay, I get the microphone on. Now I'm trying to activate the video. Oh, the host disabled it. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Regarding condominiums, it's got about 2,000 homeowner associations in the state right now. When statehood was granted, we didn't have any. But presently, they house about 40% of the state population. As a metric, only perhaps 4% are self-managed. The other 96% are under contract management. Okay, this is a problem. We don't have voting rights guaranteed to the condo owners, who are the property owners and taxpayers. Those elections are run by the management companies, and they are free to manipulate them because although they're registered to do business, they are not regulated. Anytime we go to these hearings, we find that there may be out of public line of sight donations to the chair, and they always run against us. The companies are there for their clients. Their lobbyists represent the companies. Okay, we need a voting rights requirement on HOAs for their members. The law was written so that you have to be physically present, but they're 70% investor owned. People aren't going to fly down here from other countries or drive across the state or island for a 1-hour meeting. We must get those homeowners associations required to allow for voting by mail or online. There was a bill to that effect, and it was killed, of course, this year. Even though in regular elections, people get the right to vote, but not within their own homeowner associations. This is nonsense. So will you introduce a bill and advocate for requiring those homeowner associations to respect the right of the taxpayer, that owner, to vote in their own election and advocate for it? Right now, legislators want to introduce a bill, then they don't advocate for passage of the bill. They introduce it and they're totally silent. We had 16 sponsors for the last Senate bill. Not a single one advocated for it. And it was subject to cut and replace. Oh, this is really bad. This is not democratic. It's really disgusting.
Dale, I'm sorry.
Taxpayer, it's not right. The way you introduce a bill for voting rights and homeowner associations and advocate for it. Thank you.
Well, I guess
Okay,
a comment. Thank you.
thank you. I'm a strong advocate for voting rights and for respecting the rights of all, condo owners and property owners. And I have not followed some of the voting rights legislation all that closely in recent times. However, I know that with the pandemic, over the last 2 years, many associations were unable to hold in-person meetings. And so there has been a growing recognition that there need to be additional tools provided so that people can participate either remotely or through a wider range of alternatives than were available to them previously. So certainly I'm happy to introduce legislation and advocate for the rights of those who have not been represented in the past. And I think that
like the councilwoman, I'll also give a brief answer too. I think we're mostly on the same page as this one. I'm sorry, Councilmember, were you done? I saw you mute yourself. Okay, sorry. So absolutely, we need to do a better job of striking the right balance. And when it comes to democracy and proper representation, and we should be ensuring democracy and our voices being heard properly on these fundamental levels. For a lot of people, they interact with their condo association on a more direct basis than they say they do with the federal government or something like that. And if these are not behaving in a democratic way, it's definitely time for some type of reform. And I absolutely respect condo owners and other property owners, and they should have a strong, clear voice and the ability to be confident that the leaders elected to represent them, the chairs of these groups, are actually representing them. I'm actually want to say I'm surprised as a neighborhood board chair this hasn't come up more directly to my neighborhood board. This is the sort of thing we weigh in on community issues all the time, sending resolutions in support of various projects, bills, and resolutions. But what I want to leave you with is that participation is key. We're really stuck in a lot of ways in democracy 1.0. My neighborhood board, for example, we were meeting online for some time during the pandemic, and that was great. Now we're required to have a partially in-person element. And anyone who's done hybrid meetings knows how difficult this is and how much it actually makes the whole process a little bit trickier than all in person or all online. But we're learning. And I believe other groups like condo associations should also learn how to incorporate smarter remote participation. I believe you mentioned voting by mail, but also online should be something we look more intensely at. So I look forward to working with you on this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Barbara, your question, please. And I think we're going to start with Ian this time. Barbara Service.
I'm on. Hi, Ian. Hi, I'm Barbara Service. I'm a retired child welfare worker, 43 years, and for the last 12 years, I've dedicated myself to the other end of the spectrum, which I happen to be on, kupuna. I'm on Kokua Council. I'm active with AARP and also on the Policy Advisory Board for Elder Affairs. My question, which doesn't have anything to do with that, but something for you, is what is a bill that you intend to see passed while you're in office?
Absolutely. I spent a lot of time thinking of what bill number 1 is, because I think for a lot of people, that's their statement piece. Other times it doesn't really matter, just put a bunch of bills out and it's your first year's work. But having been asked something similar many times, one thing I'd really like to see done on the state level is following the shoes of Kauai County. So when Mayor Bernard Cavalia was elected, he appointed a majority of women in the main director roles. And they came to him and said, women are being paid less in the county than men for the same job. And he said, is that true? And looked at the numbers. Well, if you look at the titles, that absolutely wasn't true. It's all based on experience. But what they came back and said was, the titles aren't the jobs we're doing. There's actual tasks that we're performing. So he brought in an audit and found that the county of Kauai was paying women about 20% less for the same work. And over a course of just a few years, they were able to correct that. And so I would really like to work with HGA, the executive and other partners, and I want to introduce a bill, and hopefully my first bill, to do a similar audit at the state level. A lot of data shows that women are paid about 19%, the numbers change by year, less than the male counterparts in Hawaii. And the state being one of the largest employers, if we were to correct a gap of a similar size, it would make an actual dent in that number and could inspire private organizations to do something similar. So I'd like to see us work with partners, do some sort of audit, see actually what tasks people are actually performing, qualify what those salaries should be, and then over as short as many years as possible, we want to do as quick as possible, correct those gaps. We've seen it done in Kauai County, and I think the substantive quality of life improvement was probably substantial. Final note on that. My mom was an employee for Bernard Cavalia and was an HGA member around that time. And she was, working single mom. And so I think she came in right after that, but that might have genuinely impacted the trajectory of my family's life during that period. And I think there's a lot of, when we talk about advocating for young people in kupuna, helping young kids, but also giving people more of the savings and money through their working lives that they would have otherwise lost to discrimination. I think it's a worthwhile venture. Thank you.
All right, Carol, your response, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara, for your question. In terms of many of the pieces of legislation that affect women employees, I actually am following very closely one of the bills that was pending this year relating to teacher compression, because my mother was a longtime teacher. And I think of all the, really key things that we have learned during the pandemic is that teachers have really been faced with almost like an unbearable burden of not only keeping their children and students safe within the classroom, but having to also deal with online learning as well as many additional requirements that they have had to face during the past 2 years. You know, I don't know whether this year's teacher compression bill is actually going to pass. I understand there are a number of areas where there have been issues in how the bill was framed, but I think in terms of bringing a lot more stability to educating children and really making it possible to attract and retain a much larger number of teachers than we are currently doing is really our job number one. And job number two after that is really increasing the supply of healthcare workers here in Hawaii. And I am glad to see that HPU and Chaminade have stepped up their efforts, you know, to increase the level of advanced degrees and other kinds of programs that they have stood up during the past 2 years. But I think if we take the lessons of the last 2 years as, you know, something to start from between teachers and healthcare professionals, that would really be job number one. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
All right, Carol, you're going to be up next. Helen, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, great. Please ask Helen, ask your question of Carol first and then Ian. Thank you.
My name is Helen Wagnerʻs, and I wanted to state that one of the things we're finding is that when we have the politicians running for office, they're quite in agreement with what the questions we're posing. But when it comes right down to the voting, it seems that there's a lot of hesitation in the strength that our representatives are showing. They're afraid to vote against the establishment. And we've gotten to the point where our voices are not being heard. You'll agree, our people will agree with us on the issues, have all the right sayings, but when it comes to the vote, they're not there. They're not there for the people. We need people that are strong enough not to be influenced by the elite that are there running the show. So where do you feel that you are in strength, that you can really honestly take the voice of the people and of the voters?
Thank you very much for that question, Helen. I could not agree with you more. And at the city council level, oftentimes when it comes to zoning decisions or budget decisions, I think for the most part, because we're dealing with community issues, I always focus on community needs first. And there have been a number of instances in which popular development proposals, say for senior housing or other kinds of developments in Council District 6 have come before the council. In instances where neighbors or community representatives have not been given a fair shake or are not being listened to, I have not hesitated to oppose the development or to vote in opposition to the measures, even if I was the only one voting in opposition. So I have learned, especially in my council services, that you have to represent your neighborhood first. And I don't know whether this is as broad a statement at the state legislature. In the years that I served in the state legislature, we often had very broad types of topics. I don't recall that there were as many instances where your neighborhood or your community may have been, strongly opposed to something that was coming up before the body. But certainly I agree with putting your community first. And we always reach out to our constituents and look for ways that we can better serve them. It's, as far as I'm concerned, community comes first. So I guess in most recent times, the type of vote that I can direct you to is my recent votes on transit, where we found that even with the new leadership, even with many of the changes that have occurred, the kinds of questions that people from my community were asking about budget numbers or accountability were not really being addressed. And so in the end, I advised the council my concerns when those measures came up on first reading, and if no corrections or changes were made, then I voted in opposition to these measures, even though, you know, a majority of members were voting yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carol. Ian, you're next.
As a longtime organizer and advocate, I 100% agree with Helen's take on this issue. It is incredibly frustrating to be met with, yes, this sounds good, I'll work with you on that. And then when push comes to shove, finding yourself out alone on this issue, and honestly, often not being told what forces are stopping it. I mean, to me, that's one of the most frustrating things. I don't always expect a good idea of bill to pass in its first year, but when everyone seems to support and you got all these co-sponsors, doesn't it feel very lonely and alienating and almost like a betrayal when you see those same leaders kill the bill behind the scenes or gun replace? It's absolutely frustrating. And it's something which I've run into many times. I've also helped successfully pass bills on the grassroots level before. And that feels like a whole other song and dance that it shouldn't have to be, because you're playing against these other almost invisible forces in our politics. And those invisible forces are often special interests who have several advantages. One, political contributions to the corporate influence and the corporate contributions, long-time connections with many of the lawmakers that's hard to break into and compare against. We see individuals heading to prison right now for illegal bribes, but also they gave many legal bribes in the tune of almost maxing out many elected officials. And I applaud those who've taken that money and donated it to the office elections or other groups to try to help clean up our politics. This other advantage they have, they show up. And I think that's one thing which Kokua Council does very well. You show up and you push back at least on that advantage that they have. So what are some solutions? Well, I've raised money from about 175 individual contributors with a median contribution of $101. And I asked for 101 because I want to show those individuals in my reporting, because only 100 and above are reported. And I'm proud to have bartenders and program managers and community college lecturers among my contributions, when so many of our elected officials are purely filled by CEOs, lobbyists, and industry leaders. Also, another solution is to be grassroots. I've knocked on nearly 5,000 doors to date, building connections and trusts. Sometimes talking to regular voters who are in their 20s and are very upset about things and they started young, but also a lot of kupuna. Furthermore, today, right before joining you, I made the decision to sign the Our Hawaii Pledge, which is a pledge to push back against out of like mainland corporate developer money, refusing to accept that, refusing to accept corporate money, and on many other fields like that. And there's been about 40 people running for office so far that have signed. And one of the things I hesitate before signing, and I want to just be completely honest with all of you, is this idea that do people take candidates seriously when they push back on these things? Because I think that's at the heart of a lot of it, that the people who are elected feel I have to do this to be a serious elected official. Well, I'm trying to change that. That's why I signed the pledge. That's why I stand against the special interests who are polluting our politics. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Don Smith, your question for Ian and then Carol, please.
Hi, my question was the same as Barbara's, is what bill are you going to just push through come hell or high water? But I'm surprised. I haven't heard anyone talk about crime yet. Can we maybe make the question be in the area of crime or getting less of it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So some of the things I want to champion on crime, real briefly, having knocked on all these doors, I've talked to
You
so
can
many.
turn this off.
Pardon me. Am I still okay to speak? Okay, sorry about that. So on the issue of crime, some of the things I want to work on, having talked to so many residents who have their homes burglarized, sometimes multiple times, heartbreaking stories of having people on camera, as someone who has camera footage and share with police, so people, their faces of them stealing my catalytic converter and vandalizing my girlfriend's moped. I know people are not feeling safe in their communities, and I want everyone listening to know you deserve to feel safe in your community. I really want to see more resources put towards the forensics and groups that can go through the data There are so many people who are dead to rights, proven to have committed crimes through footage or other sort of means, but we just don't have the staff going through it. And because of repeat offenders, that means every day it's not done, more people are victimized. I already mentioned having camera footage of people who broke into the home, but one other one I want to highlight that I find just absolutely just awful, something which I think will boil the blood of everyone here, is that the large majority, about 80% of rape kits in Hawaii go untested. And these are times where people have potential genetic evidence, so people have committed some of the most heinous crimes, and it sits on a shelf and rots. So this last session, I worked for Senator Stanley Chang, and one of the bills he was championing was to make a program through the University of Hawaii with our fantastic forensics schools and classes and people majoring in that, to make programs where they can work with our professionals and go through some of the lab work. And I do think one of the most popular possible internship programs or special class structures of the university would be help us catch sexual predators who are preying on some of those vulnerable people in our community and people and victimizing people. Lastly, a lot of this falls to the county issue, but I think there's a state role. We need to get more people who are actually in law enforcement. We have a huge shortage, and this is leading to overtime and burnout. And we can do this in a number of programs. Senator, okay, I'm getting my hand waved. Maybe someone else asked about crime and I'll go into more data, but thank you for this wonderful question.
Thank you, Ian. Carol?
Thank you so much for this question from Dawn. This area is actually kind of more at the city level. So I welcome, your question, because we are receiving a huge increase in complaints from constituents, both online, phone calls, et cetera. And part of what we are really partnering with HPD and the prosecutor's office on a lot more now is to identify individuals, partly through video footage, and then work with the HPD community policing teams within various neighborhoods so that we can increase the number of individuals that we actually help identify. And for more and more areas, say, for example, on Tantalus, we have a very, very active neighborhood security watch program on the Hill, where the people who have been both breaking in as well as smashing and grabbing, from parked vehicles, et cetera, are also being caught on video footage at various points, not only at the individual property owner's home, but from other cameras up and down the hill. So the vehicles are also being identified. And as we move forward, I believe that if the city and state work together more closely, we have a prosecutor who is very committed to identifying individuals who are repeat offenders. We have done that successfully with the Weed and Seed program in Chinatown, where if we have individuals who are, say, for example, either homeless individuals who have chronic addiction or other kinds of issues, who have been involved in a whole variety or string of either shoplifting or theft cases and other kinds of assaults, they are now identified up front between a task force that includes the prosecutor's office, the police department, as well as various other state agencies that deal with healthcare, mental health services, as well as addiction services. And so rather than just allowing these people to be jailed and then freed one day later, they redirect them into the kinds of programs that can actually help remove them from the street, as well as making it possible for them to receive services which can help redirect their particular actions. So in many ways, I think the initial success of Prosecutor Alm's Weed and Seed program this year is a really good model for us to build upon. And I would strongly support additional state resources that can augment what is available now at the county level. I also agree that we have to do a much better job of helping the police department recruit and attract individuals and to pay them in competitive ways that perhaps they don't currently experience. Thank you for the hand wave. I will end here.
Thank you very much. All right, now this question comes from me. There's been a movement towards YIMBYism versus NIMBYism, but I'm bringing up a topic that kind of strikes of NIMBYism to me. I don't know the current status of an earlier proposed affordable senior housing project known as Manoa Banyan Court that was planned by the owners of the Manoa Chinese Cemetery, but I'm aware of the controversy. The plans, which seem to be conceptual and not formalized or government reviewed or approved yet, seem to show a relatively attractive community, but the community itself complained of high density, increased traffic, lack of uniformity with the neighborhood. Please explain your position on the proposed affordable senior housing complex, Manoa Banyan Court. And this goes to Carol first.
Thank you for that question, Lila. I can say that I unequivocally do not support the original proposal that was advanced by the Laika group at Manoa Cemetery. You know, in Manoa, as in many other communities, how you approach a community in proposing projects makes a big difference. And in that particular instance, what we discovered through some of the Manoa neighborhood board meetings and at a big town hall that was held at the end of April was that the Manoa Cemetery developers had not reached out to neighboring property owners, to many of the neighborhood board organizations and other community organizations that are also very active in the valley. And I think there's no one who stepped forward during the April 30th town meeting who opposed senior housing. I think it was more a matter of what's appropriate for that particular location, what's the appropriate size, what's the appropriate scope, and how we find ways to work together in the community to achieve a positive goal. You know, I think many of the concerns that were raised also spoke to the fact that in recent years, as you know, this proposal may have been formulated, there were no efforts to also pursue other methods of increasing the amount of revenue that the cemetery could generate. And, you know, I think some of the community stakeholders also pointed out that there are a number of ways that the cemetery could capitalize on its historic and heritage status by offering either tours or other kinds of revenue generation types of strategies that may not rely so heavily on large-scale development within the Manoa Valley area. And I guess finally, I would also point out that the location of that particular proposal is currently zoned Preservation 2. And so the proposal would really have changed the zoning to the equivalent of multi-family apartment zoning in a preservation land area. So, you know, I think if anything, the discussions that I've seen taking place so far show that the cemetery people say that they're listening to people in the community. So I'm hopeful that, you know, subsequent discussions will reveal that they have learned from that initial set of objections and will come back with a much more attractive and compatible project for the community in which they're proposing to build it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Ian, your response, please.
Thank you. A very good question. First off, Sterling Higa started a YIMBY group, and our Makiki neighborhood board was the first one to receive him. I think of Makiki as a place that has all types, and I think that's a real strength. We really have a wide variety of different types of housing and for different types of needs. I think of Fernhurst and their amazing program transitioning women out of being in prison, back into the workforce, housing that helps transition people off the street. I do think Manoa is quite different. And so for me, I appreciate you asking my opinion on this important matter. But to answer the question, I'm not a supporter of the Manoa Banyan Court as it's been proposed. I hear the issues surrounding it, and I was happy to hear that the current process is paused. I will differ slightly. I think the outreach wasn't as bad as was just articulated. Not everyone, when they're doing affordable housing projects and others, have access to high-paid comms directors, but I'll concede it wasn't ideal. And one of the things is, and this is what I mean by there was a fair amount of communication still. I did make time to attend the town hall as a chief. I spoke at the town hall. I've been a frequent attendee at Manoa neighborhood board meetings and Malama Manoa, where I've heard so much about it over and over again. And he also took up the offer from the cemetery to actually go learn about the project and tour the site and look at the plans. So I didn't take this decision lightly, and I do think there's a fair amount of data out there. For me, it comes down to an issue of finding the right place for the right home. And we should start by recognizing that Hawaii is in a housing crisis and there's an urgent need for affordable senior housing. Having worked with the Alzheimer's Association, I'm disturbed by the rising rate of seniors in particular experiencing homelessness. And I think there was over 1,300 as of a count in 2019. And I've heard it's gone quite a bit higher from the governor's coordinator on homelessness. I think when we think about the unique character of low density communities, what really came out to me was the need for the green spaces and traffic concerns and the location not quite being right and the preservation land is all being very important. And I also found the overwhelming community concern being quite compelling. As a neighborhood board chair, I know firsthand the importance of grounding the planning and policy needs in the community. So I believe we do need a lot more housing, and I would be supportive of it being downtown. I talked a bit about Aloha homes and also on TOD lanes. One big advantage is it puts the people in the senior housing, especially closer to good resources, walking distance from community markets, very close to hospital and other healthcare resources. And I do feel that's the better place potentially to put it. However, I will commit to you that I will look at every proposal on its individual merits every time. And so if they come back with a very different proposal, I'll try my best to come with open eyes to look at it and review it one more time. Thank you.
Wow, that was 3 minutes on the nose. Okay, Ian, you're still up for the next question. Doug, are you ready?
Yep, I'm here. Okay, many of Hawaii's urgent issues, food sovereignty, affordable housing, homelessness, rail, public transportation, require the use of land. So this is a land question, which is in short supply, in Hawaii. There are about 2 million acres of land held by the state, which are lands seized illegally during the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. The apology resolution of 1993 signed by Bill Clinton acknowledges that these lands were taken without consent or compensation. These lands were ceded to the US and held in a public trust state in order to compensate the people that the land was taken from. Now, the state now leases these lands for a variety of things: industrial parks, shopping malls, astronomical observatories, large corporate agricultural fields for like Syngenta and Monsanto, now Hartung and Bayer. And last year, legislature passed a measure that would allow the extension of the leases for up to 100 years. Now, in the face of this, there are a number of Hawaiian groups, Kanaka Maoli groups, that are growing a little bit impatient about this and feel slighted by the decisions made by the state. So and I point out that I think Aloha Homes would use these lands all for. That's a proposal, but we'll get to the answer when I get to you. I see you shaking your head. So my question really is, what sorts of guidelines or limitations do you feel should be placed on the use of these Hawaiian ceded lands?
Thank you very much for that really fundamental question. I'm going to start with the last part you ended on. I'm going to work my way back to Aloha Homes. I recognize, while I was born here, that as a white man, I'm being asked, what do I think the lands that were seized illegally from Native Hawaiians should be done with them? And I want to start by just recognizing maybe that contradiction in terms, but a very important question nonetheless. I would work with our Native Hawaiian communities to help find the best pathways forward. These lands should be used to fulfill the needs of our communities, especially Native Hawaiians. And so I would be a firm partner, not someone. I don't believe that you put me in the back room with someone I'm going to come with the wise plan and then come sell it to you. I think that process is backwards. So first off, I will work with Native Hawaiian partners. The district is home to Papakulea, one of the oldest Native Hawaiian homesteads and one of the only ones in an urban area. And I understand they have many concerns related to lands being used by the Board of Water. And there's other concerns about the land sliding and damaging foundations. And as a neighborhood board chair, I've heard their voices, attended their town halls, and I will do that to a much higher degree even if I have the honor of being elected to the state Senate to work on these issues. So that's first and foremost. Now, the local homes as an original proposal did not exclude the use of ceded lands for these purposes. So you were quite right on that. That was a first proposal. And I believe it's important we let people who try to come up with these ideas get it wrong the first time. It didn't pass. And it has since been changed to explicitly exclude the use of those lands. And I think that's a great improvement, having listened to the groups. And likewise, at times I might make mistakes in these issues. But I want you to know in those moments, I'm going to listen and learn and correct those mistakes because no one always gets it right the first time. And when it comes to an issue of unwinding the damage of our colonial past and the exploitations of lands of Native Hawaiians, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of working together. And that's what I'm promising to provide, working together to try to unwind those, undo where possible the damage, and to make a better, more righteous future for the use of these lands as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, for that question. I do want to point out that the 1978 Constitutional Convention also tried to identify the ways that ceded lands should be utilized and established the Office of Hawaiian Affairs as one of the entities that was going to play a large role in the future in determining future uses of ceded lands. Of course, we are all familiar with the past 50 years since the Constitutional Convention, where many of those goals and lofty aspirations have not been realized. And so I agree that Native Hawaiian beneficiary organizations, as well as ceded lands participants, should also have a role in determining what future uses should be. I also believe that as we have moved forward, we have begun to place a much higher emphasis and value on Native Hawaiian values. And the example I would bring to your attention is this year's remarkably short period between the time that residents who were located close to the Red Hill Fuel Storage Facility first experienced water contamination in the post-Thanksgiving weekend. The federal delegation, Hawaii state legislators, city council, mayor, governor, everyone pulled together, and within a 3-month period, partly because residents all around the island, as well as in many of the affected communities, all came forward. And I think that's kind of what it's going to take for us to advance specific actions that will resolve many of these ceded land issues of the past. But I think this past year was a great starting point. I think we understand that in order for Hawaii to be prosperous, we are going to have to learn how to be sustainable and to incorporate Native Hawaiian values within everything that we do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Rick, your question, please. Starting with Carol.
Okay, so Carol and then Ian. So this is a current events kind of question. What would you do if you were elected and found yourself in strong disagreement with the leadership? This could be federal, this could be state, could be local. Carol?
Okay, well, I have found myself in many instances where I have been the only one voting for or opposing a specific piece of legislation. So that role does not frighten me. As far as the current leadership of the city council, I have had a number of instances where I disagreed with some of the public information and access decisions that the recent leadership has adopted. I am a strong supporter of group action, but I also believe that in instances where your community or your voters are being either disenfranchised or not being heard, it's your responsibility to stand up for them and to ensure that someone is carrying the torch. So as far as standing up to leadership, that really is a non-question. I have done so on a number of occasions, and I think we can all learn to be opposition, leaders, while at the same time being respectful and civil.
Thank you very
Ian?
much.
Thank you very much for that. I actually realized I did miss part of Doug's previous question. I really briefly want to mention the HB 499. That bill was passed, which would extend the leases. We would ask specifically about that. And I just wanted to add, 2001 wasn't the right time. Advocates felt especially betrayed because they'd limited access to the Capitol during the pandemic when such a sweeping bill was passed. And I think that was absolutely the wrong time to have conversations like that. So I just wanted to throw that one quickly in for you, Doug. And that might also be a place where I might have disagreement with leadership in the future. And for those of you who know me, know that I'm honest and I stick with my guns. I can speak politely. I understand we can disagree on one thing and still work together in the future, but I'm focused on the goal. And I specifically am not afraid to use my voice when it's appropriate. I regularly speak with electeds, and if they ask me my opinion on things and we disagree, I share that. I recently was announcing that about 7 elected officials at that time had come out and endorsed me all at the same time. And it wasn't because I agreed with all of them on everything. It's because they respected my process and collaboration and the way that we do disagree and agree and have those conversations. And I actually credit this because to my early experience in politics, when I established at 18, the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee on Kauai, and had a chance to sit down with Mayor Bernard Cavalia, who's quite a bit more conservative than me. And he would ask questions of me when I was 18 about, as with the advisory group, about what we thought of gay marriage, and I was a strong supporter at the time, or whether we should legalize marijuana or other things that he was much more conservative on. And I was able to have these conversations, and they were respectful, and that increased my my courage in it. And so even if someone was to be disrespectful at the time or leadership was pushing pressure on me, I know when to stick to my guns, and I have the confidence of doing it, especially when I know I have the backing of my constituents. And I think that's another key element. When you know you're on the right side with your constituents, you can stand up to that pressure because you know you can be reelected or have that communication or relationship. And so those are the main points I would highlight about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, Greg, do you have your question? I believe this will be the last question.
I do.
All right, so please ask it first of Ian and then of Carol. Thank you.
Okay. So I have a question from a Makiki resident who works in the energy sector. And she would like to know, what are your thoughts and position on the state's goal of 100% renewable energy by 2045?
Absolutely. This is a topic that's very exciting to me and very important to me. In college at UH Manoa, where I studied economics, my honors paper was on the role of private investment in renewable energy in Hawaii. I'm a strong supporter of renewable energy. Real quickly, one of our biggest imports to Hawaii right now are fossil fuels for our energy. It's about 3.3 billion per year. We should be keeping more of that money here by paying workers here to do that. Hawaii doesn't have the same sort of strong special interest groups that are making enormous amounts of money off of Hawaii's fossil fuel industry. We don't have that in the same way Texas, the mainland, has in many places. So if we can't do it here, we're not really offering a lot of hope for the next generation. And that's what I think a lot of it's about, because Hawaii is a small place. The total carbon output from us is not a major facet to the global warming phenomenon and the total amount that's done worldwide. But we still nonetheless have a kuleana to future generations. And it's not even that far off future generations anymore, who could be extraordinarily negative impact if we fail to meet this 21st century challenge. 2045, 100% renewable energy was ambitious when it was set. I believe we were the first state, but we hear from experts today that's not fast enough. Without rapid decarbonization over the next 8 years, the future trends won't really allow us to meet the goals globally without hitting a level of catastrophic global warming. We're out of time. And really, unfortunately, a lot of our leaders from the past have failed to fully recognize this or at least act on it. And so one of the reasons I'm running, and one of the reasons the young person is running, is we're really running out of time to be able to do something substantial on this. So we need to be doing this faster. People are very hung up on the 100% renewable energy part. We must get there. But another question worth asking is how quickly to get to 60 or 70%? How quickly can we get majority off of this and move on from there? I think sometimes when we look at the big goals and the huge challenges, it can scare us into inaction, because what can we possibly do to achieve all of it at once? Well, let's take it piecemeal and let's move quickly. And that's my thought on it. Thank you very much.
All right, Carol, please.
Thank you. Well, I agree with the renewable energy goal. What I also would like to do is focus a little bit in areas where oftentimes the particular renewable energy projects that are being proposed may not always have strong community buy-in, particularly in communities where they feel that they are the only locations in which some of those, say, wind turbines or other kinds of projects are being located. So at the same time that I strongly support renewable energy goals, I think we have to involve communities more closely in determining where and how different types of renewable energy projects should be located, and to look for ways to ensure that the goal doesn't disadvantage some communities more than others. So it's, it's something that perhaps we have looked at the big goal, but not always looked at how some of the ways that we get there may disproportionately negatively affect some communities more than others. But that is something that I think will take a lot more closer cooperation between state and county regulators, as well as state and county legislative bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Rick, I'm so sorry, I've lost myself. Where are we right now?
So I think right now we're going to have them wrap up because we're almost 1 o'clock. Is that correct? Or do you want to keep asking questions?
Okay, let's wrap up at this point. I'd like to give each candidate 3 minutes to provide a closing statement. And during that closing statement, if you could please state your differences with each other in terms of your positions, so forth and so on. I'm sorry. Anyway, let me start with Carol first.
Let me thank Kokua Council for this opportunity today, because this is really first for me in doing this type of remote type of community forum discussion. And it's really something that I think we have to utilize a lot more aggressively as we move forward. With COVID still an issue in Hawaii, I appreciate, your organization's willingness to engage with us and to make the discussion available to a wide range of viewers. For today's discussion, I think I learned a lot. I welcome, this opportunity to engage both with the council as well as Chair Ross of the Makiki Neighborhood Board. I think the areas in which we perhaps may have the widest range of differences would be in terms of where we see various solutions coming from. And, I applaud his involvement with the state legislative process and his early advocacy in the area of healthcare and Alzheimer's. And I think that having now served on the county council, I can really see the much broader range of issues and challenges, because oftentimes between our city and state agencies, we don't often connect the dots, and we don't often harmonize or integrate solutions when we keep having the same problems over and over. And I know Ian will recognize the fact that we both get complaints about the homeless encampments on Pi'ikoi Street between the Lunalilo Freeway and Upper and Lower Makiki constantly, week by week. And that to me is a great example of where it's going to take a lot more than just state legislative or state government operations. It's going to really take all of us at multiple levels of government to harness the resources that we have at the community level, as well as all those that we can bring to bear from government services. So with that, thank you so very much for this opportunity, and look forward to many more forums.
Thank you, Carol. Ian, your closing statement, please.
Thank you so much. Again, mahalo to the Kokua Council. This has been really great. As the council member just said, this is also my first chance as a candidate to have a forum like this. And this is our first forum together as well. So thank you for kicking this off. I've worked with you before. So if I'm elected, you can trust me when I say that my door will always be open to you, and not just as someone to listen, but as a forward operating base for you at the legislature in advancing our policies and supporting kupuna and solving many of the issues that we discussed today. You know, some things we probably have quite a bit of overlap on. I want to mention some state and federal policies I've been involved in. On the federal level, and for some of you here who volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association, we've successfully advocated for Alzheimer's research funding increases to be quite substantial. We've also pushed for bills that create equity in research, because so often people of the same socioeconomic background and ethnicity when they participate in neuro research, and we want to make sure that the treatments of the future incorporate everyone. We've also worked on dementia care management program support and pushing bills to get these centers for Medicaid and Medicare innovation to test better payment structures. I think most of the people here have probably gone one of my calls to action on the phone when I was with the Alzheimer's Association, asking for things like that. And as I've shared, I want to work on a long-term care model. I believe it is feasible. I believe the studies have shown that. We need more new studies to refresh it, but I want to move forward on that, and supporting kupuna aging in place and giving substantial support to caregivers, the most compassionate and hardest working people in our society. For differences, you know, as I think we both mentioned, this is a first for us. I think I want to differentiate differences in approach, much like the council member did. I think she was very respectful in her answer on this one. I will try to share that as well. The council member and I have been allies on many issues before, she was mentioning, and I respect her for her long career in working in this. But when I want to think of the bigger structure, and one difference in my approach is that elected officials have passed measures on many of these issues, yes, but usually not substantial, usually incremental progress. That's why we're seeing so many crises today on many of these issues. I'll offer a fresh perspective, reframing the issues not tackled before with informed experience from my advocacy that I've listed. And as I go about my community and I talk with family members and caregivers and residents, I'm hearing firsthand about how government response has missed the mark. By being out and doing this grassroots advocacy, I'm building the network to be able to talk to constituents to better understand the right way forward together. One of the last things I want to address is we have worsening trends. I mentioned climate change, but also with the exodus of people from our state. One thing I want to emphasize is that I understand the profound sense of urgency for the moment we find ourselves in Hawaii. And I will work very hard, diligently with that sense of urgency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol, Ian, it was a pleasure to meet you via Zoom, and I hope you're comfortable with it. We had a few glitches, but I appreciate that you just stayed with us despite those glitches. You're invited to join us at any of our Kokua Council meetings. We have another one coming up on July 11th to meet the candidates for House District 25, Ala Moana and Kaka'aku. That's my community. Anyway, it was really, again, a pleasure. Thank you very much for the generosity of your time and how comfortable you made us with just to meet both of you. I hope that whoever is elected will leave your doors open to us. Return our calls, our emails, our texts. There's so many ways to reach you, and I hope that you will be reachable. Mahalo to everyone for joining us. It was a pleasure, and please take care. Aloha.
Mahalo.